Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this very interesting panel, Violence on the Land, Violence on Our Bodies. My name is Janet Rodriguez. I am an immigrant to Turtle Island, and as means of grounding myself, here we ground the work that we do by first acknowledging the land in which we are working and studying. I want to start by saying that Toronto and Ryerson University are in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and newcomers, have been invited into this treaty in spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I know that we're all joining from different spaces, so to find out about which land are you on, we're going to put a link. It's native-land.ca. And when you have a moment, make sure that you click on it. And if you're not in Toronto, there's probably a wealth of information letting you know who are the First Nation peoples who were there, who are the Indigenous people from those lands. So we are very grateful to Elisha and Courtney, who are sharing with us their research today. The purpose for this panel is to make the connection between ongoing state colonialism and common media narratives around violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. We know that these are heavy, triggering topics. So we want to start with a content warning. We'll start off by hearing from Courtney Skye. And if you have any questions for Courtney, we encourage you to place them in the Q&A function on Zoom or in the chat if you're on live stream. Courtney Skye is Mohawk, Turtle Man, from 6 nations of the Grand River Territory. She's a research fellow, yet a First Nations-led policy think at the Faculty of Arts at Ryerson University. Without further ado, I'm honored to welcome Courtney Skye. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Janet. Thanks, everyone, for joining in and participating in this live stream. Hopefully, my internet connection is clear and not too staticky. Maybe folks that are hosting can let me know if that's the case, and I can mute my video to help with that. But I just want to start off by acknowledging that the Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, trans, and non-binary people who have walked onto the spirit world and their relations here that still fight for justice, honor, and dignity in their memory. I'm really pleased to come and talk to you today and talk about colonial violence and how that impacts our bodies, how that impacts land development, and what that means for Indigenous people. Canada, as we know, is a colonial state. Canada continues to exist off the profit and exploitation of resources and lands that are belonging to Indigenous nations. And so for myself, Mohawk woman, Haudenosaunee, we are located in across what is now Ontario, Quebec, and many states of the US in the Northeast. And our nation has been impacted and disrupted by colonial violence. We've have many treaties and agreements. You heard of one that impacts the Ryerson community, the Dish with One Spoon. There's also the Nanfan Treaty Area, and also the Haldeman Proclamation, which is a land grant that is along the Grand River, which affects 38 municipalities, kind of just a stone's throw from Toronto, which is where my community is. when we talk about the ways that our communities are disrupted, it really is important to emphasize that this is a process that has been ongoing, and that in the many generations that colonialism has happened, there are, the days and weeks and months that that plays out in. It's an ongoing process, and it's changed over time, and it's impacted communities in many different ways. Each community has their own experience with that. But settler colonialism, what it does is it seeks to replace an indigenous population, and so that we're no longer the dominant people within our territories. And that's done in order to control land, water, and resources. Within that, there's a structure of systemic violence, and that's the harm that people suffer because of social structures and the institutions that sustain it and reproduce it. But we also have to understand that our modern society and the ways that settler colonialism played out within, our modern context is also shaped by Indigenous resistance. So Indigenous peoples are active, organizing, and resisting this every day in many different ways. We can see the impacts of settler colonialism in communities, both in the economy and social structures, within family structures, and within sexualities. And it results in disproportionate harms towards Indigenous women and gender nonconforming people or gender diverse people, queer and trans people, where they don't fit the social narrative, and they are impacted by violence, and then our family structures that are not normative family structures. People within clan systems, family or nations like mine that are matriarchal experience violence, racism, and stigmas surrounding their structures. All of this has had an impact on Indigenous people, and there's many different ways that people respond to that. Sometimes Indigenous people will adopt a colonial mindset. They internalize colonialism and oppression. There's dominant narratives that impact them, and they begin to believe these myths and stereotypes about themselves. They can restructure or adapt. So they determine new ways to transform cultural practices and adopt new technologies or new ways to ensure their survival. They maintain their ways of being, so they can hide or continue their cultural practices that are distinct from the mainstream, and or they undermine or resist colonial structures. So they organize or resist or fight back essentially, which is what you see with Six Nations happening now at 1492 Landback Lane, where colonial structures and the way that Canada operates with land claims and on unfair treaty making or failing to uphold, crown obligations, where that circumstance is denied or rejected by a community, and a community resists, kind of the formal processes and does their own thing to assert sovereignty over their land.
And you're back. Welcome back.
Yes, I'm back. Thanks. Awesome. Yeah, so I just want to talk about the inquiry and what it's some of the overarching findings on how to address this legacy of colonial violence. They identify some, 4 key areas, which is that an absolute paradigm shift is required to dismantle colonialism within Canadian society from all levels of government and public institutions. Canada has failed to implement provisions of legal instruments it has signed and ratified that protect Indigenous rights. So things like, rights of the child, different human rights conventions. Canada fails to implement those recommendations in any timely manner that would actually see kind of the assurances of rights of Indigenous people. Canada has displaced Indigenous women and LGBTQIA people from traditional roles in governance and leadership, and that self-determination and self-governance is fundamental to Indigenous and human rights, and a best practice that needs to be addressed if we're going to see any type of, um, dignity and basic respect for humanity of Indigenous peoples. Um, I know this is a lot of information, but I just wanted to um, kind of end on one thing, and that when we talk about the violence that Indigenous women experience, when we talk about the you know, the violence that happens to land, the violence that happens to our bodies, and the violence that happens to our society when it's disrupted, is that in the face of all that, in the face of, you know, displacement, criminalization, victimization, Indigenous women maintain spaces of safety and resistance. Indigenous women are claiming spaces in policy and decision making, and it's especially important when when the control of land and waters is at stake. It's critical to stabilizing Indigenous communities as well. Women need, you know, the space and decision making and leadership in order to support our communities. Um, and while the Canadian state may seem like an immovable object, what we have to recognize is that Indigenous women are an unstoppable force. And there's a space of tension and conflict. And in that space, Indigenous women are driving social change and political discourse in a way that seeks to end colonial complacency, and it redefines our relationship with the settler state and fundamentally changing the nation itself in its process. So I'm going to end there, and just hoping to have more questions, Q&A, if that's possible.
Thank you very much. That was really very important words, and thank you for all the work that you and many of the folks that are around you are doing, because for many of us, sometimes what we study in school about colonialism seems like a distant thing in the past that we read in the books, when actually you are teaching us that this is actually happening right now. The land back lane movement is not, what you're fighting for is not new, but it actually it's now being sort of like a resurgence, and there's more support, more solidarity from non-Indigenous peoples, and more willingness to learn. We usually also put at whenever we speak about these issues, we put a link to the fundraiser page, because we understand that when folks fight for their rights, the Canadian state doesn't look upon that very favorably, and any movement is seen as a trespassing and a violation of Canadian legislation. And then the bodies not only receive the violence, but also are dragged through the legal system, which is, as we know, extremely costly and very elitist. So thank you, Maddie, for putting that link. If you get a nation, or if you cannot, share it with folks in your organization and others that can actually make a donation.
Yeah, for sure. The folks at 1492 Land Back Lane, because there's injunctions that are in place on the land. The spokesperson, Skylar Williams, he's awesome. I should just say, yeah, so I don't know when it cut out, but I'm going to actually show folks that are here. If we turn around, I'm actually here at Land Back Lane, so it's snowing here. And this is part of the community that's been built here. I'm in one of the buildings that was built on site. And then you can see some of the tiny houses in the distance. So this is actually the site of, you know, resistance and, you know, anti-violence work, safety work here. But yeah, this is the site here. So yeah, there's a $20 million injunction that's affecting the land here. And yeah, so it's also why my internet is not super great.
It's not working. You were saying about the name of a person when I was saying that how some people get dragged through the court system. You mentioned a name, and maybe we can.
Oh yeah. That is the spokesperson for the camp, Skylar Williams. So because he had taken on this spokesperson role, he was named as a party to an injunction proceeding. So most folks that are here are covered under the injunction as Jane and John Doe, but Skylar was specifically named because he's taken on kind of the public role of talking on behalf of the people that are on the ground.
Yeah. Yes, we've heard about Skylar, and that's I heard him speak once from his track, and it was very, very powerful, and his spirit was strong. I really really inspired me to do a little bit more also from my side. So we have this question. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of fighting against colonial legacies? Like, for example, here we have the Egerton Ryerson statue.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's important to understand that, myth making and making of, settler myths is really important to the colonial process. Um, that uh, that when uh, that in order to take over land, in order to steal land that isn't yours, you have to have this, rhetoric of rightful possession. And so by recasting the people who are responsible for this colonial legacy as, you know, as just or fair or people worth, honoring and remembering, it erases all of the kind of inhumane actions that they've taken. And so this rhetoric and this, this valuing of people, John A. Macdonald is another person, the architect of the residential schools, right? And so people will remember him as very simply as, the Canada's first prime minister, without acknowledging his role in residential schools and the violence that was perpetrated against children within that system. So that myth making is really important. It's important to understand and contextualize, colonial history and really tell a fulsome story. It's also a part of replacing the existing history of the Indigenous nations that are there. Our modern history is that European history was brought to this territory, but there was tens of thousands of years of history here already being made, nations and people and leaders and stories and songs that are from the land here that are erased when, colonial people are centered and told as the only people that are here.
Thank you. There's a question that Marie would like to ask.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Courtney, for this information. So somebody's asked in the chat, I appreciate hearing that Indigenous women are participating in moving change within the Canadian system. I also understand that women, particularly Indigenous women, can often be seen as disposable or locations of infinite emotional energy. How do we actually support Indigenous women, so those of us who are settlers or colonizers here, how do we actually support Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people who are fighting the good fight in multiple areas? Thank you for this question.
Yeah, I think that's really important because it's so I guess difficult, right? Especially if people are not particularly in relationship with Indigenous women or don't have those strong relationships. And I think that like one of the things that's important is to also just to listen to the people around you. I think that, what often happens is people think of Indigenous women as only as perfect narratives of a lived experience or a particular lived experience, but don't do enough to actually, value the actual people that are there and the stories and the relationships that are there. So I think that, being in good relationship, if you do know Indigenous women and remembering the, the ongoing daily violence they experience and trying to support as best you can to be a good friend, to be a good colleague, to be supportive is really important. But it's also hearing people and actually engaging those people, right? It's easy to dismiss an actual Indigenous women that and replace them with like an image or an imagined kind of perfect victim or perfect kind of lived experience outside of actually maintaining relationships with people that can be sometimes difficult to navigate. And also people tend to, when they have difficulties in those relationships, fail in their accountability to either maintain, repair, apologize, learn, do better within them. So I think that's really important.
Thank you. There's another question, what has been so far the expressions of solidarity or support from non-Indigenous people, whether around the land back lane area or from other areas, not just individuals, but maybe organizations or groups or, I don't know, people in academia, labor? What has been so far the expressions of solidarity?
There have been so many expressions of solidarity, and I think one of the things that's been really amazing is that people are coming to their solidarity in the ways that they're comfortable, where they're at, and growing and learning as they go on, as they build a relationship. So it's different for a lot of different people. It looks different. It's based on, a lot of people, their abilities. But just like some examples, there's been a group of people that are local that live within the Haldeman Tract who are settlers who have taken it upon themselves to organize and bring lunch every day. So they bring a hot meal to the site for the land defenders here every single day. It's been amazing. They make beautiful home cooked meals. There's a group of people that live, further up the Haldeman Tract who are a group of Mennonite people who have stated that they are not going to pay their taxes this year, and they are going to donate it to the Land Back Lane Legal Defense Fund, and they're going to refuse to pay their taxes until the province engages in good faith negotiation with the nation. And places like Yellowhead Institute at Ryerson, they've written solidarity statements, they've supported the legal case, they've published folks from the community. It's different for people's access. It's so different, it's so varied. There was a rally in Toronto outside of Minister Rickford's office of the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs, and they wrote land back on the street out in front of his office in the summertime. It's different. And I think we've been really folks have been really respectful of people being autonomous, that people have to take kind of that personal responsibility over what their solidarity and allyship looks like, but recognizing that people learn and they grow, and that will change over time. And so people that, when there was the land reclamation that happened in 2006, that might have had like stereotypical ideas about Haudenosaunee people, that they didn't engage with the community back then. Now that there's another dispute that's playing out, they've said, no, I want to be engaged this time. I want to do something different. And so seeing different people engage in different ways has been really, really amazing to see just how that changes, and how as people learn and grow and understand the issue that's happening, that they do more, right, and continue to show up and show support.
That's great. Maddie has another question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much, Courtney. It's good to hear that folks are continuing to come out and continuing to learn how to be better allies. It's a good example for all of us. Here's another question. I think this will be our last question. Can you please tell us more about the importance of matriarchal systems in your society? This seems like a new concept to many of us who have been raised in a patriarchal settler society.
Yeah, for Haudenosaunee people, the matriarchal structure is so important. It's rooted in our laws, it's rooted in our creation story. And so it plays out in governance and decision making. But what it really, means for land defense, or what it means for land and caretaking, is that women are stewards of the land. The ways that people transmit their clans and their nation is through their mother. Um, the only way that people can, be Haudenosaunee is if they're adopted by a woman, or if they are, if they're born of a mother, right? Fathers don't transmit their clans. And so there's a role for women in decision making. Women appoint chiefs and leaders, and so they have a really strong voice and a really strong relationship. And so when we have, settler societies that don't value the roles of women, that have historically not heard women or heard women's leadership, it does put you into conflict with them, right? And so it's one of the things that's very difficult to understand. And it's difficult to be, a person who has a kind of like inherent and an inherited kind of way of being and living, and then to grow up in a society where that's not the case, and there's this conflict between those things that happen, and that impact you, right? So it's something that is kind of like the ancient traditions of our nation, to hear and respect women, and to have these kinds of roles and responsibilities for people of different genders. And so it's interesting to see, and experience feminism, to experience, different gendered discussions. And but yeah, we're one of the oldest nations, and we're still here, and we're still trying to do and conduct our laws and our ceremonies and take up our responsibilities in a way that respect our traditions and our inherent right to, govern ourselves, but also to govern ourselves under a matriarchal structure.
Thank you so much. That's an incredible teaching, and I'm personally grateful. And I have tons of love for you and for all the work you folks do. Thank you. Thank you for being here today, for being here with us. We are I'm going to invite you to stay because we have the second part of our session as well. So let me continue with the program. Thank you, Courtney. And if you have the final goodbye words or asks for the community, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I unfortunately can't stay. The internet issues have been making it difficult. I appreciate everyone's patience with that. Thank you so much for having me, and keep doing what you can to support and organize around Indigenous rights and issues. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to take Courtney's words to heart. So we're going to continue now with the next part. And our next speaker has actually sent us her talk in a recorded video. As we know, internet is not always reliable. So we'll share that next. And let me say a few words about the speaker. Elisha Corbett is currently a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Studies with a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. She is a Cherokee descendant, but not an enrolled member of Cherokee Nation. She currently lives on the unceded and traditional land of the Algonquin Anishnaabeg peoples with her partner and 2 cats. Elisha's research broadly focuses on media representation of murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. With that, we can go ahead with the video.
Elisha Corbett, and I'm honored to be here today to talk to you about my research on media representation of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. I'm going to talk today about how the media creates, maintains, and silences the violence that Indigenous women and girls experience. Before I begin, though, I'd like to contextualize a little bit about why I'm doing this research and how I'm doing this research, because my positions and my relations deeply inform the work that I do. So I am a first-generation university student, and I'm currently completing my doctorate at Queen's University. And I owe this opportunity to all of the many women in my family who have come before me, specifically my mom. I was also a senior researcher with the National Inquiry, where I wrote 2 chapters for the final report, one of them on media representation. And I'm also a Cherokee descendant, but I'm not an enrolled member of Cherokee Nation. And it is entirely these experiences and my family's history that have led me to do this work, and consequently, how I approach the topic. And I'd also like to give a quick content warning. So having conversations about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls necessarily includes conversations around genocide, racism, violence, and sexualization. Indigenous women and girls experience disproportionate and distressing violence that constitutes genocide. Today, there are over 4,000 murdered or missing Indigenous women and girls in Canada. And as only 2% of the female population, they are grossly overrepresented as victims of violence. When I talk about violence, I'm of course referring to physical and sexual violence, but I'm also referring to cultural, spiritual, institutional, social, economic, and land-based violence. I can't talk about one form of violence without talking about the others, because this violence is so interconnected and it's systemic. Today, I've broken down my presentation into 4 parts that highlights how the media is responsible for some of this violence. And so first, I'm going to talk about how the media has created this violence and I'm going to examine historical representations of Indigenous women and girls in Canada. Next, I'm going to explain how the media maintains this violence by connecting historical representations to current mainstream media. And third, I'm going to discuss how the media actually silences a lot of the violence that Indigenous women and girls experience through its complete lack of representation. And finally, I'm going to talk about my research a little bit more specifically, identifying some of the research gaps as well as problems with mainstream media. To understand current day representation of Indigenous women and girls, we have to understand how these representations are deeply rooted in racist historical stereotypes. Early representations of Indigenous women are all overtly sexual, and they're intimately tied to the process of colonization. So these representations of Indigenous women have changed with how colonizers viewed the land. So at first, when colonizers came to Canada, they portrayed Indigenous women as the queen. She was militant, being portrayed with arrows and feathers and draped in jewelry. And she was something to be both feared and desired. And this is how colonizers first viewed the land. However, once settlers desired to conquest more land, the queen trope was replaced with the Indian princess. And so the Indian princess was a girlish sexual figure who's scantily clad, and she's shown as working with settlers to colonize the land. And so this representation of Indigenous women really symbolizes virgin land that's open for consumption. However, once colonizers wanted to conquest even more land, they replaced the Indian princess trope with the S word. And so the S word is a really racist and derogatory term for Indigenous women that literally means dirty, immoral, and unworthy. This portrayal of Indigenous women shows them as being lewd, as unfit mothers, or as drunks. And this representation was, and still is, used to ignore the violence that they experience and to justify it. So the S word was used as the antithesis of the traditional Victorian model of motherhood and womanhood. And so by portraying Indigenous women this way, it excuses the violence that they experienced by white settler men because it's the age-old cliche, she was an easy woman who was asking for it. This portrayal of Indigenous women justifies the Canadian government forcibly removing their children from them. And so if Indigenous women are portrayed as unfit mothers in the confines of Victorian motherhood, then the Canadian government justifies to itself residential schools, the 60 scoop, high birth alerts, as well as the overwhelming number of Indigenous children who are in child welfare services today. And so it's through these historical representations of Indigenous women and girls that the media has created some of the violence that they've experienced. In addition to creating this violence, the media has also maintained it. And so the Indian princess trope still persists today, but it's been reconfigured a little bit. So we see this trope in the Disney movie Pocahontas. So in the film, Pocahontas is overly sexualized. She's scantily clad most of the film, and she works with John Smith to colonize her land. In reality, Pocahontas, which wasn't even her real name, was a 10-year-old girl. So she didn't fall in love with colonizers, and she didn't help them settle the land. She was kidnapped and raped. And she is one of Turtle Island's first stolen sisters. Yet, despite the fact that Disney's Pocahontas is not based in any historical evidence at all, it's probably the most widely consumed piece of entertainment by non-Indigenous people about Indigenous people. And Ojibwe journalist Jesse Wente has actually explained how portraying Indigenous women this way suggests to non-Indigenous Canadians that Indigenous women are somehow more sexually available or mature at a young age. And so this further sexualizes Indigenous women and continues the narrative of them as easy women. And so we actually see this representation in another way, sexy Indian Princess Halloween costumes. And so not only do these costumes, again, overly sexualize Indigenous women, but they're also a form of cultural violence. The media also maintains the violence Indigenous women and girls experience through the high-risk frame that it applies. And so the S-word stereotype that I just talked about has just been reconfigured to this high-risk frame, which emphasizes Indigenous women and girls' criminal behavior, particularly sex work. And this frame also continuously mentions Indigenous women's alcohol and drug use or abuse, as well as their homelessness or if they were runaways. Unfortunately, research shows that this frame is applied to Indigenous women regardless of if they actually engage in a high-risk lifestyle or not. And so this framing is really problematic because a media frame entails responsibility. So framing tells us who's responsible for the issue and what solutions need to be prescribed to solve the issue. In the case of murdered and missing Indigenous women, by continually including information about Indigenous women's criminal behavior, there's no emphasis on Canada's past and current colonial policies that shape and constrain this behavior. And so the media frames Indigenous women and girls' behavior solely as an individual choice. And in framing genocide as an individual choice, the responsibility for solving it lies within Indigenous women, not the perpetrators of violence, not Canadians, and not the government. This type of framing excuses the violence they experience by placing their sole responsibility on Indigenous women and girls. And the high-risk frame is sobering when compared to how white missing or murdered are treated by the media. White missing or murdered women receive more positive coverage. There are details about who they were, how much they're missed, and what they meant to their communities, even when they engage in high-risk behavior. And it's not to say that the media shouldn't talk about sex work or drug addiction, but right now, they're only partially presenting the lives of Indigenous women and girls. This type of coverage needs to be contextualized. In addition to maintaining violence, the media also silences the violence that Indigenous women and girls experience. Indigenous women and girls consistently receive less media coverage than their non-Indigenous counterparts. And given that Indigenous women roughly make up only 2% of the female population, yet account for over 10% of all female homicides, the media's coverage is not proportionate. Indigenous women should receive much more coverage than they currently do. There are fewer stories written about Indigenous women and girls compared to white women, and there are also less details in these stories. So stories about Indigenous women don't mention who they were or what they meant to their families. Stories about Indigenous women and girls are also given less prominence and are poorly placed. So they don't appear on the front page, and they often appear beside soft news. And the placement of news articles is really important because it signals to readers what's considered newsworthy. As it stands, how the media places Indigenous women and girls suggests that they are not newsworthy victims of violence. And this completely silences the violence that they experience from the public conscious. And I want to emphasize that representation matters, particularly in the case of murdered and missing Indigenous women. So research shows that the majority of non-Indigenous Canadians receive their knowledge about Indigenous people and issues through the media. And this affects the level of knowledge that they have about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls genocide. In fact, polling data shows that only 4% of non-Indigenous Canadians can identify that the genocide is an issue facing Indigenous communities. Consequently, the lack of knowledge that non-Indigenous Canadians have about Indigenous women and girls and the distortion of this knowledge shapes their opinion. So research shows that most non-Indigenous Canadians hold racist and sexist beliefs about Indigenous women and girls. And these beliefs are derived from the media. Public opinion on the issue, in turn, affects public policy. And so the government works like a thermostat. It responds to more or less policy depending on what the public wants. So if Canadians don't advocate for more policy or even any policies to address this genocide, it continues the cycle of violence that they experience. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk specifically about the gaps in knowledge I'm attempting to address in my doctoral dissertation. So the work that I did for the inquiry and the research that other academics have done on media representation is just the tip of the iceberg. There's still so much we don't know, and we can't fully understand the media's role in creating, maintaining, and silencing this violence, and we don't have the full picture. And so to address this, my doctoral dissertation explores media representation of Indigenous women and girls and compares this to how Indigenous peoples use media to frame the genocide. The first gap in knowledge that my research addresses is how media frames compare across Indigenous women and girls. So we know that the media overwhelmingly frames Indigenous women as high-risk individuals, but how does the media frame Indigenous women who don't engage in high-risk lifestyles? Does the amount of coverage differ between these two groups? Is there a difference in the amount and type of coverage that murdered individuals receive compared to missing individuals? What about age and region? And so these are some of the differences that I think we need to explore to fully understand media representation. The second gap in the research is that current studies are really confined to a short time period, a specific region, and they only look at a handful of Indigenous women. My research spans from the 1800s to present. It looks at media across Canada, and it does so for almost 2,000 Indigenous women. And I was fortunate enough to be granted access to the Sovereign Bodies Institute database of Indigenous women and girls to be able to conduct this really in-depth, large-scale project. And the third gap in knowledge is how do Indigenous news sources like APTN frame Indigenous women and girls when compared to mainstream sources? And my dissertation explores this comparison. And finally, my research aims to center Indigenous voices in academia by creating a model of media framing that encompasses how Indigenous peoples use media to frame the genocide. I found that the current media framing literature isn't really conducive to how most Indigenous peoples are using media to discuss Indigenous women and girls. And so to address this, the next phase of my research will be to conduct interviews with different Indigenous content creators who use media to discuss Indigenous women and girls. And I want to create a model of media framing that's reflective of their practices and knowledge. In attempting to address some of these gaps, I have found a few key findings so far. First, in comparing media coverage for Indigenous women who are framed as high risk to those who are not, I found that individuals who are framed as high risk actually receive significantly more coverage. There are more stories and more details in the stories written about high risk individuals. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that individuals who are not framed as high risk are framed any more positively. This finding suggests that the S-word stereotype continues to persist. And part of the problem is that journalists only write about what they know. If they perceive Indigenous women to be the S-word or high risk, then this is what they will write about. Second, perpetrators of violence receive significantly more coverage than Indigenous women and girls. A lot of news stories focus on murders, trials, and describe in detail the violence that Indigenous women and girls experience. And so there's no regard for the dignity of the lives of these women. This finding is made worse for women who are murdered by a serial killer. And of course, a serial killer or a murder is newsworthy. It's shocking. The problem with this type of representation is that it exists in the absence of appropriate representations for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. This suggests that Indigenous women and girls are not newsworthy themselves. Only shocking and gruesome details of their deaths are. Third, there is a complete lack of coverage for some Indigenous women And I found many cases where an Indigenous woman or girl receives no coverage at all, regardless of if they are framed as high risk or not. However, I did find that there are more cases where an individual has no coverage if they're not framed as high risk. This again suggests that journalists only write about Indigenous women and girls when it fits the S word or high risk narrative. And finally, I found that across all provinces and age groups, individuals who are murdered and who are younger receive more coverage than missing or older individuals. In examining media representation of Indigenous women and girls, I've come to identify 3 main challenges to hindering more accurate representation. The first is the lack of Indigenous peoples represented in the media. Indigenous peoples are woefully underrepresented as journalists and on media boards of directors. Journalism industry is still primarily white, heterosexual, and male. This, of course, limits how issues are reported and what issues get reported. The second challenge facing media representation is the political economy of the media industry. So media companies have owners and shareholders who limit what and how journalists report. The day-to-day workings of journalism places significant constraints on how journalists report. There are often time and space limitations which don't always allow for an in-depth analysis of an issue. And finally, how non-Indigenous Canadians and the government view the land is the most significant pressing challenge. Perceptions of Indigenous women have always changed with perceptions of the land. The government needs to change its view of the land from that of conquest, control, and extraction. This, of course, entails Indigenous peoples having land sovereignty and self-determination. Despite these challenges, the media must accurately represent Indigenous women and girls if it wishes to end its cycle of creating, maintaining, and silencing this violence. And this is where I hope my research, particularly around centering Indigenous peoples and media, will shed light on the path forward. Odo, thank you so much to the organizers of this event for allowing me to share my knowledge with you.
Well, it is us who thank you very, very much. This work that Elisha has done is incredible, and we thank you. I would like to just take a moment, a pause for us all to take a deep breath and really ground ourselves and think for a bit, because we're all consumers of news. So this can bring a more critical eye on that newspaper, magazine, or radio program we reach out to. Let me continue with the program. And I am going to ask Michelle to introduce themselves. And when they are ready, I will pass the baton and I will leave the floor. If you would like to end the live stream at any point for this, so we'll end the live stream then. You just have to say so. Thank you, Michelle. Floor is yours.
Bonjour, nega manaminido de Becca, to Nishnakas, Tron Dunchbash, Gedegash Gashdodem. My family is from St. Kitts and Martinique, the islands in the Caribbean islands. And I had the beautiful pleasure and honor to be the wife of the late Calvin McFarland, Cameron McFarland of Saugeen First Nations. And we have 4 amazing young men together. So that's what brings me here to sit here and share. I have on my journey I met this drum. I had the opportunity to live my life within the Indigenous community in Toronto. I've been living immersed in the Native community in Toronto for over the last 35 years, and I've been drumming for the last 23 years of those 35 years. So I give thanks to be able to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I facilitated some of these universities. Part of the work that I'm doing, I'm singing with APIS at Spadina and college. So I just like to give thanks for you allowing me to just share some songs with you and just bring a little bit of light or joy or whatever that brings. It's beautiful to be able to hear the other speakers, and I just like to share a couple of songs from some of my sisters that live here on Turtle Island around Toronto. Way oh way, way oh way, way oh way, way oh 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 way. Oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh. Way, oh, 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 way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, oh. Way, oh, 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 way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, 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 way, oh. When I started singing, one of the biggest and most beautiful opportunities that I had was to be able to be in relationship with my sisters, my community sisters that I now call family. Being in a sisterhood was never something. That's not how I grew up, and so finding a space to be with other strong women um, was the most beautiful gift I received while being in community. One of my sisters, Marie Gaudette, shared this song. My kids were going to First Nation school in Toronto, and she shared this song to help them, the kids, keep journeying, to make sure they would stay in school. Because they would stay at school when they were at First Nation school, but then when they went into grade 8, they were dropping out. And so she wanted them to keep going. She wanted them to keep going to school. So in the mid 2000s, she created this song and she worked with them, making video, making and they made a cassette at the time, the VCR cassette, and just to have them remember to keep the 7 grandfather teachings in their heart, um, remembering our love, our grandfather's love, humility, wisdom, respect, bravery, truth, honesty, wisdom, love, respect, and humility. And I think it was beautiful to be able to sit there and have my boys be able to be a part of that and a part of the work that she was doing. This is the song that they created, and I'd like to share with you the 7 grandfather song. When I started singing, I didn't have a voice. I couldn't even ask for a glass of water if I wanted one for myself. I would go I would go out with all my children. I'd always make sure they got, but I would never ask for anything for myself. On my journey and walking in this community, I found my voice through this drum, and I have the beautiful opportunity to continue to sit in this community over the last 20 years and see so many women and men and our two-spirited brothers and sisters and all of our relatives and how they identify themselves have this beautiful opportunity to be able to sit together and to be able to raise our voices up and know that we can say and speak when we need to speak. And this drum is a beautiful opportunity to shake all that stuff up and allow that voice to come out. Just share a song with you. One of my sisters from Curve Lake gave some words for this song I'd like to share. It talks about how it is to live here in Toronto, how to live here in this world that has been created, and talks a little bit about that. Now watch what I do.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was incredibly powerful. We really understand the power of music, and we really appreciate your talent and your generosity of spirit to share it with us today. Before I pass the floor to Maddie, I would like to give you an opportunity to address the group of people here.
You know, it's been an honor to be able to walk this road. I don't take it lightly. It's a big responsibility. But to be able to see and meet and so many people across Turtle Island who carry this drum, and to be able to see all the beautiful people that are doing the work of healing the land. You know, all the songs that we share, all the songs that we sing, they have a story. And all the stories of each song talks about its responsibility. So the drum carries its own responsibility, and each and every song has its own responsibility. So knowing that, knowing each song and each one of their responsibilities is a big responsibility and I really don't take that lightly. You know, I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm not too sure why, but I'm nervous. So I kind of feel a little bit tongue-tied, but I'm okay. I don't know if I don't know what it is, but I give thanks to you for being able to honoring me to so I can come and just share a little bit with you all as you do this amazing work that you're doing, and sharing these beautiful voices um, of all the people that have come and talked today, and who will continue to talk the rest of this time. So I thank you for that, and thank you for allowing me to be part of it. Miigwech.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been an honor. And I'm gonna say goodbye, and I'm gonna pass it on to Maddie Fass, who is the VP Equity and Campaigns here at CSAR. And now I'm going to sit back and watch the rest.
Thank you so much, Janet. And thank you to Elisha and Courtney and Michelle for all sharing with us tonight. I wanted to end off with a call for solidarity because for years, Indigenous students, faculty, and staff have been calling for the statue of Egerton Ryerson to be removed from the Ryerson campus. It's long past time for this monument to the architect of the residential school system to be removed, and we're calling on members of the university's community to sign onto our petition calling for it to be removed and replaced. So the link to sign the petition will be in the chat. And we also wanted to invite you, we know typically on the 14th of February would be when the strawberry ceremonies are typically held. Strawberry ceremonies, for folks who don't know, are held to honor and pray for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So there's a virtual strawberry ceremony happening on Sunday. So I'll be posting the link to that event, as well as the petition in the chat. And I encourage folks to sign the petition and to come to the strawberry ceremony on Sunday if you can. I also just want to highlight the next event that Caesar's holding. Our next event is a Ttc Forum, which will be on Thursday, and we'll be talking about our stories as transit riders and our goals for improving our public transit system. So we'll be ending that session with a legal question and answer period about your rights as a transit user when it comes to fair policing. And the link to register for that meeting will be in the chat as well. So thank you again so much for joining us and for your questions. Take care.